Random Thoughts. In this video, we are going to look at some of the notes that were made by the American intelligence regarding the assassination of Abdirashid Ali Sharmarke. Now, Abdirashid Ali Sharmarke was the first Prime Minister of Somalia, and he also became the second President of the Republic. He is also known for being the father of Omar Abdirashid Ali Sharmarke, who served as the Prime Minister of Somalia between 2014 and 2017. Now, Abdirashid Ali Sharmarke was from the Darod clan, and he was born in 1919. And he was a founding member of what was known as the Somali Youth League. Now, the Somali Youth League was this organization that was created by the young educated Somalis in the 1930s. And the primary goal of this organization was, of course, to push for the independence of Somalia. It was also pushing for the unification of all the territories that were occupied by Somali-speaking people in the Horn of Africa. Now, he did get his elementary education in Somalia, primarily in Mogadishu, and then he later on went to Italy to get his undergraduate. He did get a BA in political science, and he came back in 1959, and he was almost immediately elected into the Legislative Assembly as Somalia was gearing towards becoming independent. When Somalia became independent in 1960, that is in July, he was appointed by the first president of the new republic, who was President Aden Abdullah Osman Dar, to be the first prime minister of the republic. I should point out that it is on this same day when Somaliland, the British colonized part of Somalia, and the Italian colonized part of Somalia came together and formed the new Somali Republic. Now, as a prime minister, he was known to push, of course, the agenda of the Somali Youth League, which was, of course, to unify the entire land that was occupied by the Somali-speaking people, of course, after the first goal of getting independence had been achieved. And he did push this a lot, and probably made some enemies, especially in Ethiopia and in Kenya, for pushing this agenda. In 1967, he decided to contest to become the president of the republic, and he did win. And after winning, the previous president, Aden Abdullah Osman Dar, conceded defeat. It's very interesting to read some of the notes that were made by the American intelligence, and they describe Somalia as one of the few countries in Africa that were practicing actual democracy. Now, after becoming president in 1967, there was worry, especially in Ethiopia and in Kenya, that he was going to continue pushing this agenda. Now that he was more powerful than he was before, he was likely to do a lot more in that regard. But he did something that went the opposite of that. He appointed a prime minister who basically went ahead and scaled back the push to unify all the lands that were occupied by Somali-speaking people, the so-called the Greater Somalia agenda. And that is apparent in the notes that were made by the American intelligence. There are reports that there was an early attempt to assassinate him in 1968, and that did not succeed. And then in 1969, October 15th, while visiting a town to the north known as Las Anod, he was shot by one of his bodyguards while leaving a building while leaving or getting into a building where he was staying, and he died. He was relatively young. He was 49 years old. The person who shot him belonged to his clan, and that makes it very difficult to take the argument that he was assassinated because of inter-clan politics very hard to take. Now, 6 days later, on October 21st, 1969, Siad Barre leads a coup, and he subsequently becomes the president of Somalia. Now, Sharmarke was the first head of state to be assassinated in East Africa. And of course, there were other high-profile assassinations that happened during that time, including that of Tom Mboya in Nairobi. But the head of state being assassinated is not something that had happened in East Africa up to that point. And in fact, it did not happen for a very long time after that. The next head of states being assassinated is what happened in Rwanda and Burundi in 1994. Why was he assassinated? Now, we are going to look at some of the notes that were made by the American intelligence regarding his assassination. And maybe through these notes, we might get some glimpse of what potentially happened. The first note I'm going to read is a note that was written by the Secretary of State then, William P. Rogers, and this is a note that was written for President Nixon, who was in office then, informing him about the assassination of Sharmarke, and this is what it reads. The subject, assassination of Somali president. And then it reads, Abdirashid Al-Sharmarke, President of the Somali Republic, was assassinated October 15th. President of the National Assembly, Sheikh Mukhtar, is next in line constitutionally and is taking charge. Somali Prime Minister Egal, third in line, is still in the United States. Egal and the Somali ambassador Azari, who is the son-in-law of President Sharmarke, have been informed. Egal is expected to leave immediately for Mogadishu. President Sharmarke fully supported Egal's detente policy. Now, the detente policy is a policy of seeking peace between Somalia and Kenya and between Somalia and Ethiopia, especially on the question of the Great Somalia policy. Peace in the Horn of Africa during the past 2 years has been important to us because of our interest in Ethiopia. A new president, according to the constitution, is to be elected within 30 days. Likely candidates include former President Osman, a former prime minister, and Egal himself. All these possibilities are pro-West and likely to continue the detente. A Muslim country, burial within a short period, 24 hours, is likely. Hence, a request for high-level representation at a state funeral is not expected. Signed, William P. Rogers. That is the note that was written for President Nixon regarding the assassination of Sharmarke. Now, 6 days later, Siad Barre leads a coup. Now, there is a note that is written by the Deputy Director of Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and this note is written to the Secretary of State Rogers. Now, this is what the note says. It says, title, Somalia military coup. And then a Somali proverb is provided. I don't know what was that. And the proverb reads, a force of cavalry will always find unguarded camels. And then it reads, the apparently bloodless coup which overthrew the government of Somalia came within 24 hours of the burial of assassinated President Abdirashid Al-Sharmarke and put an end to the efforts of civilian politicians to reach agreement on a new president. One of the last states in Africa with legitimate claim to a democratic system of government has now turned to military rule. The takeover is likely to endanger the politically courageous attempt launched 2 years ago by Sharmarke and his Prime Minister, Mohamed Ibrahim Egal, to ease Somalia's irredentist problems through dente with Kenya and Ethiopia. The coup. The army moved early on October 21, 1969 to seize control of the government, the radio, transport centers, and other key installations. Later, a revolutionary council composed of army and police proclaimed state of emergency, dissolved the National Assembly, and suspended the constitution. All ministers, presumably including Egal, are under house arrest. The Revolutionary Council announced over Radio Mogadishu that it will respect all treaties and agreements made with friendly countries, maintain a policy of non-alignment, self-determination, and non-interference, and provide help and support to all freedom fighters. Motivation. Coup leaders claim to have acted in order to put an end to widespread corruption and abolish tribalism. The new regime's desire to support freedom fighters suggests a discontent with the detente may also have been a motive. Leadership. Given the army's power, it is probably the senior partner in its alliance with the police. According to a regime spokesman, Major General Mohamed Siad Barre, the army commandant, and Major General Jama Ali Korshel, the police commandant, are working closely together on the council. The names of the additional members are not yet available. Siad, an outspoken critic of the detente, and Korshel may have engineered the coup or may turn out to be figureheads for a younger group of officers. Implications. In defiance of Egal's policy, Siad's army has in the past undercut the detente with Ethiopia by covertly arming Arusi Gala rebels operating in southwestern Ethiopia. It is generally believed that most army officers and perhaps a number of police have looked unfavorably upon the detente. As a consequence, a return to the expansion policies of the pre-Egal era may be in store. Even should a newly emerged coup of army lead be willing to experiment further with the detente, they will encounter reawakened Ethiopian suspicions. The coup may also provide increased opportunities for the Soviets. A large percentage of army officers have undergone training in the Soviet Union. While it is doubtful that a significant number are communist, many may be susceptible to Soviet influence. Furthermore, army officers have long yearned for more sophisticated military equipment to offset Ethiopia's superior forces and may now wish to acquire greater military aid from the Soviets. The Soviets may well comply with the request of an irredentist Somali regime, particularly in view of the American presence in Ethiopia. Somalia's nomadic tribes are heavily armed and could resist army authority. Moreover, the army is tribally divided and could itself be hard put to maintain its unity should serious tribal disorder develop. The emergence of tribal tension ever present in Somalia, coupled with the political upheavals of recent days, could usher in a period of serious unrest. There is another communication or record of the American intelligence regarding Sharmarke. Now, this is a note made about the meeting very early on between Chairman Khrushchev of the Soviet Union, who was the leader of the Soviet Union in the 60s, and President Kennedy, who was the president. This is a meeting that happened on June 3rd, 1961, and the notes were made regarding this meeting by the Secret Service or maybe the intelligence. And this meeting between these two leaders seems like it happened when they took a walk together in a garden in Vienna, Austria. Now, these two are having a conversation about various issues, various global issues. And at some point, Mr. Khrushchev makes a statement regarding Somalia. And he makes this statement in a way that seemed to suggest that he was disappointed by not only Somalia, but several other countries regarding their claims of wanting to be socialists, but they were not walking the talk. And here is a short paragraph from that statement or from those notes. It reads, Mr. Khrushchev then recalled the recent visit to the Soviet Union by Prime Minister of Somalia. The Prime Minister is a comparatively young man who was educated in the spirit of Italian culture. He said that he wanted his country to develop along socialist lines. But the questions arises as to what is socialism in the view of all those people. Nasser, Nehru, Kurma, Sukarno. Nasser, of course, is the president of Egypt during this time. And then we have Nehru, who was the leader of India. And then we have Nkrumah, who was the leader of Ghana. And Sukarno, I think he was either Indonesia or Malaysia. All of them have said that they want their countries to develop along socialist lines. But what kind of socialist is Nasser when he keeps communists in jail? Nehru certainly does not favor the Communist Party of India either. So he puts Sharmarke in group of very many leaders from Africa and Asia in general. This group of leaders will make claims of them wanting to be socialist or to develop according to socialist ideals, but then they didn't. So it seemed like the way these notes are made seems like he was disappointed. Let's read parts of an article that was written by the Times. This is an article that was published on October 24th, 1969, a few days after the assassination of Sharmarke. And I'm going to read parts of it, and there's a reason why I chose to read this article by the Times. It reads, Sharmarke had gained a mild reputation abroad as a troublemaker when he served as the nation's first prime minister between 1960 and 1964. Largely because of his efforts to obtain sovereignty over those parts of northern Kenya and eastern Ethiopia roamed by Somali nomads. He chose as his prime minister Mohammed Haji Ibrahim Egal, who promptly proceeded to end the border frictions. Despite this seeming reversal of Sharmarke's Greater Somalia policies, there was no evidence of friction between president and prime minister. Now, when you read all these documents, there are so many people who could be suspects or people who could have wanted Sharmarke dead. There are the Soviets who did not like his way of embracing the Soviet ideals, and he seemed to be leaning more to the West, especially going by the first note I read where the president is being informed that all the people that are potentially going to take over after Sharmarke were pro-Western. So whatever policies that were going on regarding that relationship, they were likely to continue being in place. That tells you that Sharmarke was more pro-Western than pro-Soviet, and especially also going by the other note about the disappointment by Khrushchev about Sharmarke's commitment to the ideals of socialism. There is also the question about his position regarding the Greater Somalia policy. He seemed to have been at the forefront of pushing it, but then at some point it seemed like he took a step back and he changed his way of thinking about it, probably because of the influence by the Americans. It's likely that's what happened. But by him doing that, likely he made enemies within Somalia. who thought that this guy is no longer pushing the agenda, so he needs to go. And likely that's the school of thought of the likes of Siad Barre. Likely, and this is speculation. I need to insist that this is speculation. We'll never know for sure. So Sharmarke's assassination will always remain to be a mystery, will always remain to be a question that can never get a satisfying answer. Those are my random thoughts.